Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of DePIN Masterminds. We're here with a special guest. Obviously, Brandon is always special, and I love having him on. But we're also here with Samuel from Daylight Energy. He's the head of community over there. And, Brandon and I, when we first met back in Seattle at DePIN Day, we were really encouraged by a lot of the people we met up with and a lot of the projects we talked to. Great projects like Flux and GeoNet and IoTex and all these projects. And we were like, we really need to focus on like core business fundamentals, industry best practices. How do we defend our projects? How do we identify those DePIN projects that aren't just DePIN because of DePIN, but they actually have like a real business reason to be DePIN? And we were chatting through a bunch of our Telegram groups, and I ran across Samuel, and I looked at their project, and I was like, okay, this is something I can wrap my head around pretty quickly. But instead of me explaining what Daylight Energy is, Samuel, why don't I give you a few minutes to explain what your project is, how it fits into the DePIN category, and then Brandon and I are just going to unload with some questions on you and have a good time, as we always do.
Love it. Thanks so much for having me on, and happy to be representing Daylight Energy. So let's get right into it, man. So Daylight Energy, we are building the world's first decentralized grid on chain. One of the terms, industry term that has been used a lot recently is a virtual power plant. So we're creating a network of virtual power plants across the US that are comprised of home energy producers. So consumer scale, solar, smart meters, electrification, heat pumps, anyone who's contributing energy to the grid is eligible to be a user in the Daylight Energy network. And by connecting their home energy devices to the Daylight app, which is on iOS and Android, they accrue right now testnet tokens on the base Sepolia network, which down the road will be fully live on chain. And so that's the consumer side. That's like the users, and on the other side are the purchasers of that power, and they purchase essentially forward-looking bonds, forward-looking futures of this power, promises to deliver X kilowatt hours, and so those consumers will vary. I can't speak too directly about who's buying the power, but there's contracts on the table, and the network is growing rapidly. We're founded by a brilliant team. Our founder is Jason Badu, really visionary young man, and so he was able to have a Series A led by Andreessen Horowitz, Crucible, Framework, Lattice, and EV3 Ventures, which is a really DePIN focused venture. So we have some amazing investors, an amazing founding team. And since coming out of Stealth at the end of July, my honor and my job has been to build this movement, and build the community around the world.
Yeah, and I think so. That's actually one of the ways that I heard about you guys was listening to Mark and Ben on their podcast, where they were talking about, most of it was about AI, of course, but then they were talking about energy DePIN, and they had mentioned Daylight in that one. That was a couple weeks ago, 2 or 3 weeks ago.
Yeah, well, it was in the last podcast. The goat. Goatsius Maximus.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Let's not get into that one.
DePIN is DePIN, baby.
But you're right. That's right. Well, we're going to argue the DePIN's not DePIN.
Right.
DePIN is a very specific thing, but yeah, no. But they were talking about AI. They were talking about Goatsy. They talked about Daylight in there. And I think that was a highlight. It was like in minute 30 or 33 or something like that. They were talking about it because I know we got excited because they were mentioning DePIN, like a real DePIN project. And we were like, yes, Mark's talking about DePIN. So then, but I want to focus a little bit on daylight in particular, because it's not just a DePIN play. I mean, the business that you guys are building on top of is what's called a power purchase agreement, or a PPA, which is already very common in the solar space, like, well, in energy in general, but we can talk about solar in particular. I have a PPA for the solar that's on my roof, right? I signed into a power purchase agreement. They basically paid to have solar installed on my house. I pay them like $112 a month, and I get the benefit of the solar energy. So where I normally would be paying like something like $350 a month in electricity, I'm now only paying the 112 for them, plus the $35 hookup to my utility. So I'm saving over $100 a month by having solar on our roof and using this PPA. And I can prepay it off at any time, and it's transferable with the house, which is like, if I ever decide to sell the house, I'm not stuck in the loan, right? So PPAs are a thing, like that exists. Just from a consumer perspective, it's a way. Now the PPA, the organization itself, gets all of the benefits of that electricity. They get the ownership rights of that electricity. Plus they get the, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but they also get all of like the renewable energy credit rights to the electricity, right? So renewable energy credits, or RECs, is what a lot of people are buying to offset their carbon footprint. So when you have your Microsofts of the world and you have your Amazons of the world, and you hit a certain size of organization, regulators say, hey, listen, your carbon footprint is X. You're going to pay a fine for that carbon footprint. Specifically in California, they're very heavy-handed on that. But if you can offset that with buying things that incentivize good energy behaviors, we'll let you offset that carbon footprint and reduce your liability from a regulator's perspective. And some of it is mandated and some of it is voluntary. So there are mandatory carbon markets, and then there are voluntary carbon markets. I think a lot of our oil production industries are mandatory, but like Microsoft, I think, is mostly voluntary, where they're trying to hit net zero on their carbon footprint. And they do a lot of that by going, listen, we know that we can't be net zero on our energy consumption, but we can go out and buy renewable energy credits or other carbon offsets from a secondary market. And that's where PPAs come in, because PPAs go, hey, listen, let's make it easy for consumers to get solar on their house. And then we're going to take those RECs and we're going to go sell it to the Microsofts of the world, who are part of the voluntary market, so that they can reach their, net zero or net neutral or net negative goals, right? So it's an industry that exists. This isn't like you guys invented a whole industry and you got to go out and find a bunch of customers. This thing exists, right?
Big time. And in fact, it's one of the, breakthrough financial models of the last 10 or 15 years, as solar has scaled majorly.
Yeah, and I think that's a lot about what Brandon and I talk about, is instead of us going out and trying to invent markets, let's go to existing markets and figure out how to make it better with technology. And if that means DePIN is a good fit, great. So that leads me to my next question.
Right.
Why DePIN? Like, what does DePIN bring to the PPA equation? Because PPAs are a thing.
I'll frame it in, because why is it DePIN? Why is it decentralized? And why bring this on chain? So the most obvious and simple answer to that is that when we are interacting with the energy economy, a $10 trillion per annum industry within the United States, the largest industry on earth, everything is electrons. Everything comes back to electricity. It's the electron, is the thing of the 21st century. It's what allows us to do what we're doing right now. And so opening that space to the ledger, to bringing this incredible amount of information that needs to happen, needs to be transacted essentially for the energy economy to work. We reduce friction, we increase efficiency, the ultimate goal of Daylight is not just to make our users, to bump our users' earnings from their solar installations, and in doing so, heighten the flywheel of solar adoption, which is that has a net positive effect for many reasons, just unto itself. But I would say the bigger goal of Daylight is to reduce latency, increase efficiency, and just make electricity more accessible to all U.S. consumers and eventually to every market that we go to. So, the blockchain and DePIN, as we call it, decentralized physical infrastructure networks, are this is an essential step in doing that, and you guys know why. Like Brandon, you maybe that's an interesting moment. I don't know if I'm the one asking questions here, but just as the founder of Conduit, I'm sure you know what blockchain can do for industries that have been kind of segmented away from it up until now.
Yeah, I might have a different take on that in general, which I think blockchain is a valuable tool, but it's not an ends to a means that a lot of people think. I don't think it's the answer to a lot of things.
Right.
So it's a tool. It's a tool in a stack that should be applied, and when applied appropriately, does incredible things. But so one of my questions, I want to go back to this, is like, it sounds like you're on Sepolia, so which means you're ETH, correct? That's where you're selling?
It'd be on Base, right?
Yep, connected directly with the Coinbase team. Had a nice on-chain summer launch as like our very first public-facing thing. Yeah.
Yep. Okay. And so, okay, that makes sense. And are you concerned at the decentralization of a chain, whether it's a L1 or L2, and where those chains actually reside when we're pushing towards decentralization?
Oh no, Brandon! Now I got to go defend Hedera now, huh?
No.
I'm just kidding.
This is a question targeted towards Base, of course, and it's
it is.
Yeah, and
but it's a question of like where we decide to architect and design and where we build ecosystems. It has to be something that we all think about. And I'm just curious, when people walk through these conversations, why they choose particular architecture designs. And really, Ken, to your point, I wouldn't say that there's a right or a wrong, as long as you can defend why. That's the thing I'm always trying to get to, is why did you decide this?
Yeah, I mean, and there's a few layers. Obviously, the level of involvement, support, connection, community that Jesse and Luca and the entire Base team have provided to us from day one. Also, we're kind of like the first tier one DePIN to be aligned with Base, which is it feels good to be the first to a space. Whereas Solana, there's already a plethora of fascinating and worthwhile DePINs that have chosen that route. And obviously Peak is coming up. There's some DePIN focused L1s that are gaining a lot of traction and whatnot. But I don't want to speak, when I say this, I don't want to speak on behalf of Daylight. I want to speak on behalf of Samuel personally. Ethereum is the world computer. Ethereum is one of the greatest technologies out there. Just so fascinating what smart contracts can do. There's a great article that Jason wrote in September called "The Rise of Programmable Economies." It's on his paragraph, which is another thing that's built on Base and is amazing. Like a perfect Web3 Substack that I absolutely adore and have used as a marketing tool to great effect in the last few months. Yeah, he just makes a pretty convincing case in there for the potential of blockchain regulated economies that are not about number go up. Like the success of the Daylight token will not be the valuation of an individual token. It'll be the reliability and sustainability of the network as it scales.
So can we dig into that a little bit? That's actually a great segue. leads to one of my other questions, but let's take it in this path, which was, how are you guys still have a double-sided market, and anytime you have a double-sided market, you have to, talk about how are you mitigating the risk of a double-sided market, and how are you pushing both sides back. So that would be one of my questions. But the other one was getting back to this. I love that you guys are looking at the fact of that the token is not necessarily a speculative thing, that there needs to be real utility. And furthermore, I would say, is Ken and I push into real business case, which would mean revenue and real things happening, that the token should just be mutualizing and disseminating if we're really talking about something
That's
that would
exactly
be
the mission. Yeah.
So how is that? That's amazing. Like, we couldn't align more, right, Ken? They could not align more on that fundamental. Then the question is, like, how are you bringing that philosophy to fruition? How does that happen inside of Daylight?
So 2 things. First, before the blockchain, the on-chain layer of this had begun, we have 2 websites. We have daylight.world, which is like the heater for, what we're building and the community work that I'm doing, and, the lumens and the testnet and all of that. And then we have godaylight.com, which is Daylight as a PPE, home solar and home electrification business, revenue positive business that's done hundreds of homes in New Jersey, Pennsylvania, New York, and Texas. And we'll continue to scale, and eventually we'll have on the ground people like a regular solar company, except when those folks join Daylight as opposed to a regular PPE, they get the added, none of the other stuff goes away. They get all of the normal benefits of home solar installs. They get the blockchain layer in addition to, and so like that's where that, like, the virtuous circle and the flywheel starts to be able to be realized, is when we have the revenue coming from our own home solar installs. And then,
so in that case, can I dig? Ken, are you okay? Can I dig a little?
Let me do a little bit of level setting here real quick, just so
please.
that everybody's catching the terminology here, because we're saying a bunch of words and acronyms here.
Yeah, exactly.
But okay, so, and correct me, Samuel, if I get any of this wrong, right? So I have a little bit of history on the software architecture side in renewable energy at Hedera. So I spent a year and a half architecting the Guardian model there, that is now one of the largest tokenization of carbon credit tracking and carbon offset tracking. That being said, there's a few things going on here. One, you're making it easy for people to get into solar, because you're taking that big CapEx cost off the table, with the promise that you're reducing their OpEx, right? So we're taking the initial investment of putting solar on my roof off the table, because you guys are taking that risk by paying for that solar installation. And then I sign a contract saying, I'm going to pay you guys a percentage every month of whatever that installation cost is. And it's going to be some number. And the ideal scenario is that number is less than what I'm paying for electricity, right? So there's a direct benefit as a consumer. Like, if we didn't do anything else and you guys were just a finance company and installer, like, there's a business there.
Already.
There's a one-sided market there. Yeah.
Yeah.
The other part of this is where we get to the two-sided market, right? And there's a few different outlets. There's a few different, we'll say the producers are the homeowners with their solar panels. And then there are consumers on the other side, right? And the consumers is the second side to this market. And there's a few there. One of them we talked earlier about, which is the carbon offsets. So getting renewable energy credits, which is basically a credit that says every time you produce a megawatt hour of electricity from your solar panels, you can now go sell that megawatt hour for, I think in California, it's like $300 or something like that. Different parts of the country, it's like $50, depending on where it's being produced and who's buying it, right? So there are different values to these RECs, and you can go out and sell those to big companies that are trying to offset their carbon footprint for either voluntary or regulatory reasons, right? So there's a market there of those carbon offsets that are coming off these solar panels. Additionally, you guys are a virtual power plant, a VPP, which means that you can now go to really bigger consumers like data centers and say, hey guys, you're going to buy a chunk of electricity up front. And that chunk of electricity, you're going to get at a discount because you're buying it up front, right? And we're going to make sure the supply is there for you. And that supply is going to come from primarily solar. You probably have some reselling agreements in there as well, in case the solar demand doesn't meet the demand of your consumers on the commercial side. But that's an opportunity right there in itself, which is
Ken, can I
you
clarify?
get the kind of,
Is that are you running the futures market on that, or are you using existing futures market infrastructure? Who is managing that?
well,
Existing
and there's
futures.
futures on Rex. Yeah, there's futures on Rex and there's futures on energy, right? Which are two different futures markets. But yeah,
One
and that was
the,
going to be my third point.
Sorry.
One of the initial co-founders is a major power trader in Texas.
Perfect. Yeah,
Great,
so
but
what he's doing.
That's awesome. I'm still asking: is that something that Daylight is taking on and creating that market and that futures market?
I think it's just going to be participating in existing markets.
Great. Okay, cool.
I need to. That is not a final answer. That's
okay.
That's
cool. Thank you.
My understanding.
Sorry, Ken.
No. That's actually good because energy is a tricky place. Like you can't just start up a blockchain company and be like, we're going to solve a bunch of energy problems. Like you have to be tapped into markets. You have to be tapped into utilities. You have to be tapped into these bigger commercial clients, right? You have to have those connections, and regulators and utilities will block you out, and you'll just not go anywhere. These are important points. So I'm glad, Brandon, you brought that up.
The existing structures, and
exactly.
The idea is really to use. We're diverting more of the benefits to our users.
Perfect. And so that's the other part of this, right? So there's a few pieces, and maybe the third piece here. So I talked about the first piece being the carbon offsets, the second piece being the virtual power plant, right? The VPP. The third part really is data, because you're providing these services for consumers. Like I downloaded the Daylight app, I installed it, I connected my Enphase. I'm working on connecting my thermostat. That's not working yet, but you're going to be collecting data about me, right? Which now becomes a data point. And if we look at every other DePIN project out there currently that is sensor-based DePIN projects, the sensor-based DePIN projects are capturing data. That's what they're doing, is they're selling you a device to put on your roof that captures data that then can be used for a use case or sold to somebody. The difference is like again, we're not inventing a market here, right? Sense is a very mature product that you plug it into your junction box in your house, and it does a whole bunch of AI evaluation of your energy usage, provides it to you, but then also turns around and sells that data, ideally anonymized, to energy companies and consumer product companies, and just the data is valuable as the other services they provide to me, or the device sales. And so those are kind of the three businesses I'm seeing. Am I missing anything? We've got the carbon offset, VPP, which is selling electricity, and data. Those are kind of the three revenue generators for Daylight.
Oh yeah,
is that correct?
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
Three-sided revenue.
Now, perfect. So you got one consumer who's getting an immediate benefit via the PPA. I get solar and I save money on electrical. I have an autistic son. He loves to swim. One of his favorite things to do is just to hop in the pool and swim. And so we put a pool heater. Actually, it was a heat pump for our pool, which sucks up $300 a month of electricity as it is. In the summer, we don't have to run it, but in the summer, we're running our big air conditioning unit that we got installed to keep him cool when he's inside. And then during the spring and fall, he swims where we are heating it. So either way, we're spending $350 a month on electricity, except for during like December through February when nobody's swimming because the pool pump doesn't heat it up enough. But that $350 a month that I spend basically every month throughout the year is offset by my PPA, the solar that I got with my PPA. So I'm actually saving like $150 a month, $130 a month by just having the solar. So immediately there's a benefit to me as a consumer. So it's almost like a win-win-win scenario, right? There's really not a reason.
That's what we're building towards.
This.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Exactly. And it's just that we're going to be able to offer, as I mentioned earlier, we're going to be able to offer more benefits to the consumer and the participant in the network than other PPAs, and it will be facilitated through
And that's, I think that's the point. You were talking about the flywheel, getting the flywheel moving, and the way you get people get the flywheel moving is you need adoption. You need the supply side, which is the consumers, the homeowners, and you need the demand side, which is your 3 revenue channels: the data buyers, the power buyers, and the offset buyers. You've got to build both of those, and this maybe goes a bit to some of what Brandon's talking about. But the trick is you got to have that supply. That supply has to be there. And the question is, how do you get supply? How do you get that traction, get that flywheel moving so that's where you come in. But I think this is where the DePIN part comes in as well, right? Is we've got the tokenization of both ownership and track and trace through the life cycle of the various revenue streams, which means now as a producer, I guess we'll call me a producer because I'm a homeowner. As a producer, as a homeowner producer, I get to participate in that economy in a way that right now with my PPI, I don't get to participate. I get the benefit of the savings on the electricity, but I get no benefit on the upside of the data sharing, the power production, or the carbon offset production. Right. Okay. I just wanted to make sure that this is why daylight is different than other PPAs. I just want to make sure. I'm already kind of being a cheerleader for you guys.
Doing it justice to, in a way that I hardly could. I have my like pattern, that I've established over 3-4 months of wrapping my own head around this. I'm not going directly off the docks. I'm like, this is the best, to the best of my understanding. This is the genius of this project, and you guys are nailing it. It's the 3-sided revenue is unique and inspiring, and then we have this responsibility. So how is this DePIN? I think that's what we're getting at. Yeah. So we're utilizing the sensors of people's home energy production, so physical infrastructure, to broadcast that data and that power availability to a network, where it then becomes something that can be purchased and utilized. And also, so we already have, we're onboarding all the, like you said, your Enphase, Teslas, electric home batteries, electric vehicles, Honeywells, all we're at the point where we're probably like 7 out of 12 like major brands are compatible, and we should be at 12 out of 12 within a couple of weeks. And so that's the pin. And then the decentralized layer is all of this data and all of this power availability is living on the Daylight network, and it's available for the purchaser side, of these 3 layers that Ken just spelled out.
And those are mostly, and that's mostly for accounting, right? I'm thinking about from
that's what it's for.
There's the track and trace and accounting of activity on the network.
Yeah.
And so, because I'm just, again, I always want to wrap my head around why DePIN. Like, could you solve the same problem with an API and a database and just selling it as a service and just issuing rewards to like just a standard API rewards ecosystem? Could you solve the problem? And maybe, Brandon, that was the next question you were getting at as I was trying to level set.
I think that it would be a different project, but that's Go Daylight. That's half of it. And then the ambitious and inspiring and unique part of this is integrating smart contracts, integrating the network. But
what is the lift that the blockchain gives you? That's what I'm trying to get to.
The lift is distribution. The lift is accountability, and accounting.
Wait, sorry. Hey, let's go back. How does blockchain help on distribution?
So, because the participation in the network is delimited to folks with solar panels on their roofs, essentially, or smart meters, etc. Those would be our only participants, were we just doing it like D2C, but eventually,
right? Okay. I'm going to steelman this. I'm going to steelman this, Brandon, and you strawman this. Okay. We're going We're going to hit this from two angles. Okay. So I'm going to steel man this real quick. And Sammy, you tell me if I'm just being crazy here, but I see a few different potential opportunities. Now, I still am going to question like the real value of this, but part of it is a community building thing. Is like we've got, and I'll make this argument all day long about Tashi. Like one of my favorite things about Web3 is they're just master community builders, right? So if you want to create awareness, if you want to start getting that flywheel moving, your first customers are going to be the 70 million Web3 active wallets in the Ethereum ecosystem. There's probably more wallets that have been generated, but active wallets, something like 70 million. Yeah, exactly. Well, okay. My data's out of date by about a week. So,
biggest.
But you've got all these. Exactly. So there's the potential for creating traction of a real project through Web3. And I'm going to make this argument because this was the same thing that we had to do with Tashi. We went to the Web2 guys, said, look at this great tech we built that's going to save you money, create anti-cheat and do all this great stuff. And they said, we love it. Go get 100 games using your technology. We went and talked to a bunch of games in the Web2 space, and they're all like, we'll talk to you in 6 years because that's our development cycle. And we're like, we don't have 6 years of runway. So we went to the Web3, which is very quick to adopt, support, all of these things. So Web3 is a great place to build communities and to get that initial traction and get that flywheel moving, right? So I think there's a community aspect to it that's a valid movement that doesn't relate specifically to the business. It's a method of adoption. You can argue that like multi-level marketing is also another channel to adoption. There's traditional marketing and advertising. Like there are different avenues to get to audiences, to get that flywheel moving, right? That's one, is the community part of it. I think the other part, Samuel, you're talking about is being able to reach outside of your silo and allow people to participate in the logic of your system without your permission. In other words, there are certain features that you're opening up, whether it's through a DEX for trading assets or data for trading data or operating on data. I don't know that Base is the right place with smart contracts to do a lot of that stuff. I think I don't know that smart contracts are the right answer to that at all. But the idea that you can open up your ecosystem to external parties to act on independently, that adds value to your offering and allows other people to build value on your product. I think that's one of the benefits of Web3 is that. Okay, Brandon, your turn. Because I'm thinking community and I'm thinking opening up the economy.
And that's what I was referring
to.
Public
network.
Yeah.
Exactly. That's what I figured. I figured that's exactly what you were saying. So
users, yeah.
Exactly. Now, Brandon, straw man time. No, I'm just.
Yeah.
I think we might have undercut his straw man there, but no, go at it.
No,
I can see some points already. Like I could straw man this as well. So
yeah.
I'm interested to see.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out whether I want to open up cans of worms there.
Well, and so Samuel, we'll let you opt in or opt out of this because I also know that Jason wasn't able to make this call, and maybe we should bring him in if we're going to start really challenging.
I would say so, honestly. I mean,
okay.
Brandon, so let's do a little shadow boxing. You can, I don't want to do anything that could get me in hot water. Yeah,
that's totally fair because I'm the CTO of my product and Brandon's the founder of his. Like we're really good at taking hits, like real heavy hits, and if we don't know the answer, we'll come back with an answer later. If we do know the answer, we're going to defend it. But
I appreciate that.
I'm going to preempt the I'm going to say I don't have the answer.
That's the best answer most can give. Honestly, is like I don't have it, but I'll get it right. And this is a super friendly conversation. But this is what, unfortunately, like Ken and I, we like to go really deep and try to understand because we're just trying to break down what's real and what's not, and that's not anything at Daylight. We do it with each other. We did it with each other more than anybody else. First of all, right?
That's why your projects are looking so healthy. Yeah,
really hard conversations and scrutiny. What do you got? I was just going to ask you. Ken, we got some action in the
Yeah, Tony's offering up some value propositions here for you, Daylight, as well. Just the proof of delivery. So, and I think this is one of those things. You can think of the advertising space. The advertising space between the delivery, the supply and demand side network. There's a bunch of black box in the middle that nobody knows what's going on. So there's a lack of transparency of like in advertising, supply is eyeballs and demand is advertisers. And the question is, when I put an ad out and you tell me that 10 million people saw my ad, I have no way to verify that. In the current advertising space, I just have to trust that the advertising, the supply side is being honest with me, and the two are integrated appropriately. And there's so many middlemen. So one of the things that Tony, I think, is bringing up is this proof of delivery, the idea that there is that track and trace, right? If I'm a consumer buying energy that's supposed to be clean energy or clean generated energy, I've got proof of where it came from and that nobody else generated that energy in the first place. Like that's energy huge. Hasn't been reaccounted for somewhere else. So Tony, thank you for that one. He also gave another one, which is,
to be clear on that though, that isn't solved by a ledger, right, Ken? That's solved by an extension of ledgers. Ledgers you're recording, but you need to get into things like proofs to get into metadata, right? So like just I want to make sure we expound upon that and go like, yes, and the way to actually fulfill a full proof of, and if we look at a supply chain of anything, you have to have expansive proofs along all those points that then combined into a composable proof set that can give you a validity to this is a truth versus a hash record that is recorded on a ledger that says, well, it occurred. What occurred? What was it?
Precisely. Precisely. That's what our engineers are working on, through these quarters. And there's a unique token structure that is outlined in our white paper called medallions. And it's essentially like a soulbound token tethered to the metering device that will then kind of be the thing, the contract that issues the data. And then there's this whole other like that will, I think, possibly remain on Sepolia. Don't quote me on that, but it will this on-chain data that is like much more, as you're suggesting, has all these extensions and goes into much greater detail than the transaction.
If only we had a device we could install on site that had trusted execution environments, Brandon. If only we had some
with its ability to handle the metadata.
With the TPM. Well, yeah. And let me just make a point about what Samuel just said and Brandon, which he just asked about, because when I was doing the same thing in the Guardian networks, we actually worked with a project called Rectify that did not make it to market, but we did a lot of work that ended up benefiting the Guardian project at Hedera. But one of the challenges is how can I trust the inverter data? So right now, Samuel, I'm going to 99% sure, 99.99% sure that you guys are trusting Enphase's data and SolarEdge's data when it comes out of their inverters, because they've got an API and you're subscribing to that API with my permission and capturing that data. Now, the thing is there's an inverter here that is sensing all the solar power that's being generated and coming through this big fat wire that goes back to the grid. And then the inverter is going to report to SolarEdge or Enphase or any one of these solar providers, and they're going to have the API. And the question is, between the inverter and SolarEdge, or between the inverter and Enphase, how can I trust that nothing's been changed or mutated? Because they don't count everything. There are things that they don't count because they'll detect anomalies, or there's certain criteria or heuristics they're looking for where some data is calculated for and some data is not calculated for in the API. So I can look at my inverter and do some math and go, I see what my inverter is telling me I'm generating. And I can go look at Enphase and say, well, Enphase is only telling me I'm generating this much solar right now. And the reason is because there's some inefficiencies that they adjust for in their calculations. It's not like they're trying to rip me off. It's just they've got some calculations that are happening on their end that correct for anomalies that theoretically are happening on the solar end, on the panels on my roof.
Yep.
So I don't hold it against them because honestly, I don't get any benefit out of it other than I'm saving money. So I don't really care what they calculate and put in their API. But I do know the API data is not exactly what's happening on my panels. I also know that my inverters, is where the data is being generated. And then in between, there's like a data lake that Enphase is holding that then they're serving the API. Now, what we were working on with the Guardian project, or specifically with Rectify, was we were going to SolarEdge and saying, hey, we want to put private keys on your devices. It'd be great if we had a TPM on those devices, on the inverters themselves, because inverters are smart inverters these days, right?
Yeah,
They've got logic in them, right? And now the challenge is they have to certify every time they launch a new inverter. They have to certify, and that's like $150,000 to $200,000 certification process. But once they certify it, it's certified. And our thing was, can we put some type of secure module on the inverter that signs every piece of data that comes out of the inverter? So we know what the raw signed data is coming out of the inverter. And then what we did, and maybe Brandon, I don't know if this answers your question or not, but we had the Guardian Network, which was a whole bunch of decentralized witnesses who saw that what was called MRV data, measurable, reportable, verifiable data. That's what we call it in the energy space. So we have this MRV data coming out, and these witnesses would witness it and then tokenize it based off of multi-sig of multiple parties witnessing this inverter signed data that was signed before Enphase got a hold of it or before SolarEdge got a hold of it. Now the challenge is you got to get it on the inverters. That's hard. Is getting invert, like SolarEdge was actually open to it if we covered the cost, and we were like, we'll figure that out. We didn't get very far with anybody else, but that was the only way that we saw that would work. And we were using DIDs and VCs, right? And so we had a few layers of this. We actually had every party had their DID, and every party issued a VC to each party in the installation chain. So you have like Vera or Gold Standard, who are standards bodies for energy, and they would go and they would sign a VC for a manufacturer, a verifiable credential for a manufacturer, saying this manufacturer built this device to meet our standard. And so, or at least it reports to our standard, right? Because it's more about data. And then the installer would have to get a VC from the manufacturer going, this installer knows how to install this device and initialize it the way that it's supposed to be initialized. And then when the installer installed the device, they signed another VC on the DID of the inverter itself. So you had this chain of trust from Project Vera and Gold Standard that would sign a manufacturer, so it'd be SolarEdge, and then SolarEdge would go to Ken's solar installation, or in this case, Daylight, whoever you're contracting to do the installation. And then they would actually sign another VC for the inverter itself. And then that inverter would then start generating data. And I can go back and prove that this inverter was installed by somebody who was certified to install it for a manufacturer who was certified by a standards organization or a standards body. And so the MRV data could be trusted as much as you could possibly trust MRV data. We could trust that data. And then we had to witness it by multiple parties, which would then tokenize it. And the proof of ownership was by the ledger. So Brandon, this is where you're saying the ledgers aren't enough on its own. We had to build like a whole standards of verification around the ledger. And then the ledger just tracked the token wherever it went. So we could always be like, okay, this person owns the token that was generated by this inverter. And then when we burnt that token, when you burn it, the proof of burn was our way of generating the reports, the compliance reports. And we'd say, when you burnt that token, you took a proof of that burn, and you said, okay, I'm now going to take the proof of burn and put it into a report. And then any regulator could look at the report, look at all the proofs of burns, go to the ledger, confirm that the proof of burns were done, then backtrack all of the history and the ownership of that token, and then verify the MRV credentials back on that trust chain back to Vera or Gold Standard. And so we built this whole tooling where it was like, to a regulator, they had a report with a whole bunch of MRV data with a bunch of green check marks next to them. And that's it. And then they would go click on the green check mark and it would show proof of burn, and then all of its transfers of ownerships. And then finally the verification back to the standards body and the inverter. So there's this huge trust chain model. And I think, Brandon, maybe that's what you're getting at, is like having a ledger where we just go from Enphase's API to, we're going to trust their API and we're just going to like have an Oracle sit here and just mint it on chain and call it a day is still not strong enough for us to truly trust the data.
And if we're building economic models around the data, the verification and viability and proof of the data is incredibly important if that is an input for what we're considering value. Because otherwise, if I wanted to game it, guess where I would go?
Right to the inverter.
Upstream. I would go upstream. Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah. And this is it is reminiscent of, STEPN being connected to a STEPN connected device, just getting tethered to a treadmill, or the nightmare vision of the goofy vape to earn, of just some kids somewhere being forced to vape 24 hours a day. Like if there is a game system, it will be gamed. And obviously this is why, we're in testnet, and the great challenge, the great opportunity with Daylight is to build reliable data network.
Well, it creates a classic man in the middle security breach. Like this is a known concept for the beginning of time of security, right? And it's a man in the middle attack on data. So, and that's where you get. So Ken, that was amazing explanation. That is correct. It is exactly what I was referring to. And it's just, that I'm not saying that that's something that necessarily Daylight needs to solve. Maybe it is. I don't really know, but these are constructs
that account for.
They need they're in order to move large scale architecture into these paradigms, they have to at some point. The question always becomes who's solving for it. But if someone is solving for it in this way and can be connected, then you've also solved. Like it doesn't always have to be one project, right? Which is why Ken and I always go back to there's many things as an example that Conduit's working on that we're we never wanted to actually do half of these things. We just did them because there were things that weren't existing, and so we needed to go build them. But it wasn't because we were excited about it or wanted to. First thing we did was look around and go, is anybody else working on? Does anybody else have a solution? Because we'd much rather just use yours if it's viable. Yeah. So, anyways, it's a great conversation. The other thing that Tony brought up, Ken, was and for infra network data integrity and then internal accounting. And that one is obviously. I'm curious about that. I wish, we could be interactive with Tony, but thanks for throwing these out here.
Smart.
I'll just say this. I think there's, again, going back to a ledger is not an accounting ledger at all. Specifically our blockchains or immutable ledgers as we see them today, even DLTs, they're not accounting ledgers in any way. That's not what they were meant to be, first of all. So that isn't a dig at any of them at all. But it's just saying, once again, we got to make sure that we're using tools correctly for what they're intended to, and or build something that would be a distributed or decentralized version of an accounting ledger, right? That would be an answer so that we can actually get all the way to the accounting. Because I do agree, once we've solved all this, we've maybe created efficiencies in the paradigms or moved current business models into new paradigms, which create an efficiency. That's the effect that you want to do. Well, then how do you account for it in true accounting terms? Right. And Ken, you've talked about this, just the pain of pulling things back out of an existing ledger to do your accounting is awful. It's horrible.
Well, and I think, your point is that what ledgers give us fundamentally is a bucket of beans, and we can just pass beans around, and everybody has their own buckets of beans, and that's not accounting. That's just buckets of beans. Which what you're talking about would have to be layered on top of those buckets of beans to actually account for the buckets, right? And so that's really what we've done, and what we really haven't done in the Ethereum smart contract world is there's not a clear accounting logic, right? And probably because it's expensive computationally to do on a public ledger in the way that Solidity is written today. Okay, I'm not going to go much beyond that. There are ways to solve this, Brandon. I know you guys are working on it. So, but that being said, accounting is, we've got hundreds of years of best practices in accounting. This is not something new. It's well established. And for whatever reason, and I'll be fair, in the last 8 years, there probably has been some accounting implementations in smart contracts. But as far as I know, nobody in the mainstream uses them, probably because of their computational burden in the layers that they're being implemented in. So, but that all being said, I just want to make sure, like, accounting is a term that is sensitive to Brandon specifically, because the rest of us, when we say accounting, we just mean like, oh, we're just keeping track of something. And Brandon's going, no, I got to be able to like run reports, and I need to be able to like file taxes, and I need to be able to balance my books, and I need to be able to do planning and budgeting and reconciliation. Like, there's a bunch of stuff that comes with that term accounting.
Not even
we use
smart contract ledgers are built to do.
That's right. They could be. They could, if somebody took time and did it, but is it the most efficient way to do it? And I think that's a different orthogonal problem.
That's a different episode.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's a different genre.
Well, and let me set the context for you, Brandon, right now, because in renewable energy credit accounting, it's all done on spreadsheets right now, and all the trading is being done on spreadsheets. So if I want my solar farm that I install on my property, my 20 acres of land in California, to generate renewable energy credits, I have to go get certified myself with an organization called Regis. And if I'm in the Midwest, it's going to be MRETs, right? So they're going to have different organizations that are private organizations that have kind of been blessed by the regulators to say, you guys are going to certify renewable energy credit certification, or renewable energy certificates is what they call it. And you pay $10,000 or $12,000 a year for them to come out and look at your solar farm and go, yep, this looks good. We certified that this thing exists. And then you go to the API data of Enphase, capture all of the data from Enphase, put it onto a spreadsheet, upload it to MRETs or Regis, and they go, okay, now we're going to list this because you've been certified with us. The data that's coming in, we're just going to list this for other people to buy. That's how the markets are working right now. Is there's like API data into spreadsheet, into Regis or MRETs, mostly MRETs, and then that's going to show up. I know there's been some cool stuff that Google has been doing with like real-time time stamping of MRV data as it comes out of the Enphase stuff that then goes into Regis or MRETs. But a lot of this trading is just done like, I just load my inventory from the API into MRETs, and then I pull that data off as a spreadsheet, and I just go do like OTC, like over-the-counter trading with people. And then they make an offer, we settle, and then we go to MRETs and we just do the transfer. And so it's like, that's the state of renewable energy credit or renewable energy certificate trading as it is right now. So I think blockchain is a good direction. Now, Power Ledger was a company that tried solving this, 5-6 years ago, right? For that specific use case right there, the energy trading part. And they built a bunch of infrastructure and stuff. Is there a reason why you guys didn't go with Power Ledger? I'm just curious why you guys are building on Base instead. Do you know that answer?
I
haven't heard anything from Power Ledger for a couple of years, so I don't know if they're
they kind of phased down operations, and then there's just a variety of cross-pollinatory effects throughout the Base ecosystem, and then especially the way Coinbase has been able to sort of establish themselves in the face of U.S. bureaucracy, which up until now has been very restrictive and combative towards our industry, which obviously is in the process of reversing that course. But Coinbase is sort of like the gold standard of like a U.S.-based Web3 venture, an on-chain venture as we're kind of breaking new ground, and interfacing and opening up an entire new sector, to this decentralized movement. I feel like Coinbase is like a natural ally in that, especially because we're all focused on the US.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, there's the whole regulatory environment, and sometimes it's who you partner with is as important as what tech you use. I've learned that a few times over already. So, well, I think this deserves a follow-up call, and we need to get Jason on here so we can really just hammer him, because I think on the surface, let me know if Jason is open to it, right? The whole goal of these. Yeah, I mean, the whole goal of these is, we beat each other up, and then after we're done beating each other up, we go, okay, I have confidence in your project, and now we can kind of go out and defend each other. It's both a scaling effort, but it's also a validation effort. So a lot of these episodes, we can turn around and hand the episodes off to even our investors or to our stakeholders, and just be like, hey, listen, we've gone through a vetting process that maybe even you guys wouldn't have done in your due diligence process. Exactly. And it's really, can you defend your business? And, I'm very optimistic about Daylight, because I look at it and I go, listen, there are existing markets that you're ideally creating efficiencies, and also a sharing opportunity in that ecosystem, and a flywheel mechanism for going to market. So the questions I always ask is like, what's your TAM? What's your total addressable market? You already knew that. You already came to us and you said this is a multi-trillion-dollar market. Yeah. So, and then my question is always, cool, what's your product market fit? Well, the fact of the matter is that PPAs exist, VPPs already exist. These things, there's already billions of dollars flowing through these specific business models, right? So it's not like you're inventing a market, and it's not like you're inventing customers. Now, there's always the go-to-market strategy of like, how do I get to those customers? And I think Web3 is a good way to get to the supply side, and the demand side is really up to your connections. And I think that's where your CEO having those initial connections in the first place is a benefit, having been in that industry, especially on the futures trading side. So I think those are kind of, for me, those are the core things. Like, how big is your market? Is there a product market fit for what you're building? And what is your go-to-market strategy? And then fundamentally, like, why DePIN, why blockchain? Like, why not just do this all with APIs and databases? If we can answer all of those, and I think we've gotten, yeah, go for it, Brandon.
Which is really around what people would historically call tokenomics, but I want to move it into economics, which is, to your point, even if you check those boxes, then how are you dealing with value creation? What's the incentivization to come in and operate in this? And there's an element where some would say, well, there's transparency, and that's great. At the end of the day, where you really want to move markets, it comes down to value. And so then that's one of the things that we didn't get into, Samuel, that I don't know if maybe you are, or there's someone else that's better, but I'd really like to dig into the value capture, value transfer across the network. And to me, that's a huge value proposition. I just said value 3 times, but that's the big value proposition to the market, is here's what we are creating by doing it this way. It could be the exact same business model as Ken is talking about, done in a different form that drives different efficiencies, which then drives a different outcome. Cool. I want to get to that. I really am like, can we spell that out? Because if that is spelled out, then the conversation for someone like Daylight or anybody else to go talk to the market is really simple. Here's how you get in. Here's what we do and we facilitate. And here's the outcome that you achieve. And that's why you want to participate. Simple. It's simple in the story. It may not be simple in the explanation, which is what I want to get to.
Right. And it's simple in the story. And the explanation can happen in a few minutes, but the execution is what takes, months and months of dedicated engineering, essentially.
Well, and being able to dive into the weeds, right? So like, there's the story that we tell up front that gets people excited. And I think, we can do a lot of that in the Web3 space. That's what the whole hype trains are all about. That's how people build these quick 1,000-person, 100,000-person communities. It's how they get their tokens out. But that wears off in about a month or two. And right now in the meme coin space, that wears off in about 15 minutes. And so you have to have something articulable behind that, right? You have to have something defensible behind that. I think what Brandon's talking about is actually kind of a new evolution of Web3 that maybe it's always been sitting there under the hood, but it's starting to be recognized with the DePIN movement is like, traditionally and I'm saying traditionally, like a few months ago, traditionally in the Web3 space, the idea is like, everything's about my token, right? I'm getting my token launched. I want to capture as much value in my token. I want to reduce velocity, meaning token value joining and leaving my network, right? I want as little value leaving my network as possible. So we're going to create artificial mechanisms called staking, and we're going to reward you for leaving value on my network. But that's adding value from outside the network into the network. But as Brandon will always tell us, and he taught me the first time we met, is like, that's one way to create GDP. The other way to create GDP is turns. How much is that money moving in an exchange of value on the network? So bringing value on the network and locking it up and staking is a sure way to stagnate your GDP, because at some point value is going to stop coming on the network unless there's a reason to come on the network. But now if you can create turns and prevent leakage, the total value of that ecosystem grows. And so a lot of what we're discussing is, how does Tashi interact with Conduit's network, and how do we interact potentially with Daylight's network in a way where the value capture for the whole is greater than the individual token value that's going to get locked up for a short period of time. It's going to stagnate, and then the whole token value drops, and the whole project is just like, well, why did we do that again? And this is, again, why we're looking for people with real business models, because if there's a real business model, the value is easy to bring on, right? It's not hard to bring value on. And then the question is, how do we create the efficiencies by creating turns? Well, and you guys already have a loyalty program built into your app. I saw that. I can go get a Walmart card for $25 for 2,500 lumens, which is your reward token on testnet right now. So like, you're already in that mindset of like, how do we keep the value on network? And this is some of what Brandon and I have talked about historically, is those types of interactions. If people want to play video games on Tashi and they're already part of the Daylight ecosystem, can they redeem their Lumen tokens for Tashi services? If they're on Conduit network, can they use the Conduit reward tokens, reward points? Let me use the right terminology. They're the reward points to redeem value on Daylight and on Tashi, and now external ones at Walmart and airlines and hotels and stuff like that. So, and groceries. So how do these ecosystems or these economies work together as a greater whole? And I think DePIN's a good place to start, because what we're discovering is that DePIN generally starts with a problem that's being solved with a market that already exists. And then we build in all of the Web3 supporting technology to make it more efficient and to do some tracking and, you know, compensation and incentives and getting the flywheel going and building communities. While a lot of the general purpose Web3 has been built as a solution looking for a problem, and people are having a hard time connecting the dots. But we're starting with the problems and coming to the table with solutions and pulling in the parts of Web3 that make sense. And what we're finding is a lot of the real business solutions, real business values in this model called DePIN. And that's why we're reaching out to the DePIN projects, but we're giving you a bit of homework here.
That is why I'm very interested, Samuel, so that you guys are starting with, as Ken said, something that's already existing. So then the question really is, can Daylight take an existing proven model and add an efficiency to that market, which creates a different outcome? If that is true, then I'm like, yeah, okay, cool, right? That is extraordinary. And then the second piece is, I would love maybe on a V2 here, Ken, is to get into kind of this, you know, rewards or value capture, value transference thing. And I'm curious if in your time there at Daylight, if you've heard anything internally around Daylight team thinking that way versus, you know, again, the trap here is to stay here focused, create a moat around my project, and do everything that I can to just build that. So I'm curious if Daylight's even.
Well, there's a few fascinating outflows, and the one that you touched on earlier, Ken, when you kind of came to that realization of a third product, which is the data. So,
sure.
That is one obvious efficiency that can be added, that is revenue generating and potentially explosive in terms of its value and growth potential.
And I'll, you know, I'm gonna now throw I'm gonna do a little Conduit commercial real quick. Like, when you talk about accounting and even some of like trusting the data that's coming out of the inverters, there might be something that you learned from Conduit and able to do that. And so I think there might be some potential collaboration on a technical level that we can start talking about, if that's interesting to your team, because there's been a lot of things. I mean, Brandon and I, like, I've challenged why doing hardware data synchronization and the limitations of it, right? And we've discovered what those boundaries are. right? And we both have gone, cool, there's a business there within those boundaries. And then him challenging mine and going, well, you're doing a software emulation of what we're doing at the hardware level, but you have to apply a consensus algorithm to make it work across non-synchronized compute. And there's a business there, but there's parameters. There's like a cutoff of like, when you don't have synchronized clocks, this would be an acceptable answer. When you do have synchronized clocks, you get these efficiencies that Conduit offers. And then we start having discussions about, okay, what are we synchronizing? And if it's accounts or transactions, now the question is, what do accounts look like? What does programmable logic look like? And Conduit's put a ton of effort into maybe the next generation. I don't want to spill any beans, but the next generation of what I'll say it, smart contracts are going to look like, or programmable accounting, right? Maybe that's a better way to think about it. It's like programmable shared accounting, right? Or programmable economies. People have said that term before. So maybe the next generation is a lot of what they've put a ton of research into, which could run on a software layer on top of Tashi, and on a hardware layer could absolutely run on the Conduit network. And then I think that there's something when we start talking about accounting and proofs, specifically in the Daylight ecosystem, the Daylight could benefit from both those technologies. So this is kind of the synergies that we're trying to build, is let's look at real projects and figure out, what am I doing that you haven't done yet? And let's figure out how to do it in a way that you don't have to do that part. And we could just like build the economies together and optimize in that way. And that way, Brandon can specialize in trusted execution on hardware. I can specialize in consensus algorithm and data synchronization on the software level. You guys can focus on PPAs and VPPs and data monetization of energy. And like, we can each specialize in our thing. And the, what would you call that? The, it's not network effect. It's not economies of scale. It's the value of the whole is greater than the sum of its parts, right?
Yeah.
Like we create this this ecosystem that's much stronger. And
Ecosystem
additionally,
be the and
what's that?
Neat phrase. So just the ecosystem effect.
Well, I might throw this in. It's actually above an ecosystem. It's how an economy works.
Right.
It's an economy. And so if it would be fascinating, Ken, if Web3 started to look at themselves as an economy, they would think in a different paradigm versus different projects or ecosystems, is when you move up to an economy level, which is the highest level of economics that we have, right? There's multiple facets. There's multiple value chains, supply chains, all of this, which builds in the United States, a $29 trillion economy, right? And so what we're really talking about here, and Ken, you said it beautifully, but it's like trying to figure out how we don't create moats, but we create bridges, because there's a lot of things that one of us has that the other one doesn't. And it's like, why do we need to build it? There's probably a mutualization here. And it's not just technology. That's one step. That may be the bridge, but why would you build a bridge? It's for something to go across it. What do you need to go across it? You need value to turn. And that raises everybody. And if you can align everybody in that, now you have an economy that truly does raise everything. And so that's what we're Ken, you said it beautifully, but that's what we're trying to focus on here, Samuel. And what we want to focus on is people and groups that are building first and foremost real businesses, because you can't have an economy without a real bit. Like, it doesn't work. You can't artificially inflate an economy. Well, you can, but we know how the net effects of that. It's very clear what happens when you do that. Things that go up must come down because there is no basis of foundation, right? Yeah. So I
want to zoom out just because for a couple minutes, I am by no means a true expert on this, but I do get the sense that Vitalik specifically is thinking about the future of Ethereum as an economy. And this is with the radical reduction of the blob fees, the real, he's taking money out of his own pocket and out of the foundation's pocket by making it so easy to operate an L2 that has access to Ethereum's liquidity and yet pays virtually zero fees. And why is he doing that? It's because he's thinking beyond the ecosystem level, and thinking about the
and I'm probably going to pop.
Yeah.
I'm probably going to pop a little bit of a bubble here. Vitalik was a really smart kid when he came up with everything that makes up Ethereum. Ridiculously smart kid. What you're going to find though is that, and you probably see it in your own company, right? Even with Jason having his expertise in his domain, And Brandon's put together this team of superheroes that are just like geniuses in their own right. And I've got a team of geniuses in our certain area, but a lot of it is experience. Like one of my first questions is when smart contracts came out, I thought that's cute. Solidity is cute, but like we already have rules engines and, domain specific languages around business processing and what accounting looks like. Like, why are we inventing a new way, a new DSL called Solidity or smart contracts when we already have well-established things that, by the way, would like bridge directly into ERPs, enterprise resource planning platforms, super easy, where smart contracts can't. Like so I love Vitalik. I love everything he's done. I've spent years watching all of the amazing stuff that's come out of it. There's been great economies coming out of it. He's a smart guy. He's intellectually honest. This is his baby. So he's obviously going to put most of his attention into Ethereum. And I love everything. The communities is what gets me most excited.
Yeah. And that's
but sometimes I come in
for. We haven't even touched on that.
Yeah. Well, and sometimes I come in some of these project communities and people like, I'll sit on a panel or sit on a space and people will say, we're trying to solve this problem. And I'm like, well, this is how telecom solved that problem using this model 15 years ago. Right. And this is how manufacturing supply chains solved this problem 15 years ago. And this is how Kona, which is Coca-Cola's infrastructure arm, solved that problem using Hyperledger Fabric. And this is how Walmart's solving it with their own blockchain. It's like, I'm looking at how other people have already solved this problem. I'm like, why are we having this talk about how to solve it again? And so I think what we're seeing right now is like, I'm chain agnostic with Tashi. My team built an algorithm that synchronizes data, and that's it. We're talking about synchronizing message queues, MQTT. We're talking about synchronizing databases, Postgres, SQL style databases. Like, we're not inventing our own way to track data or to message data. No, those patterns already exist.
Or a walled garden or a moat. Yeah.
Right. And then I know Brandon, his team, he's got quants on his team whose like whole job is to like analyze economic models and figure out like what is the math behind this. And these are like people coming from traditional financial industries. And so they know what they're doing. They've seen 20, 30 years of this. And so sometimes when we come to the table, we'll ask questions that are a little bit like, if you were to put us in a room with your tech team, I think it'd be very productive. First of all, if you can get us in a room with them, or even on a whiteboard.
Advisors, I will pitch it to the team.
But, and that's not what I'm trying to show here. But my point being is like, I think that with our collective experience, we could challenge some of the assumptions and the patterns that exist today. And because I think what's happened a lot of times is people are being handed this box of toys and saying, all right, figure out how to use this box of toys to solve this industrial problem. And it's like, well, everything's made of plastic. That's not going to solve my industrial problems, right? And it's like, well, but if you go down the street to the tractor warehouse or whatever, you can get some farming equipment that will solve your real world farming problems, but it's been there for 20, 30, 50, 100 years, 1,000 years. It's not something we had to invent new. So I love Vitalik and I love the way he thinks. And I like to see him come up with new ways to solve these problems. But when it comes to like real world business problems, that's a different skill set completely. And I love the innovation when I see people do algorithm and mathematical stuff. And I'm like, oh, you solved a new way to synchronize data between two parties who don't necessarily have their interests aligned. How can I use that to solve a real business problem? And by the way, I don't want to reinvent the DSLs for business process modeling or rules engines or anything like that. Like we can go grab.
Right. And then 2 years later you have Compound, and then 2 years after that you have 1,000 Compound forks, and there's there's like $35 billion available liquidity that wouldn't exist if it wasn't for that problem being solved that way.
Yeah, and I think of Web3 as like the sandbox for the future of fintech, right? There's a lot of cool stuff that's happening, but there's not a maturity that's happened yet for it to really go mainstream, and we're getting there. I think we're seeing that maturing happen now. And I think when we think of economies, we're thinking of like global economies, like, a $2 trillion economy is tiny. Like if we think of all the trading, I think, what did we figure out, Brandon, a couple of weeks ago or last week? Wasn't like 2.58 quadrillion in total financial transactions every year or something like that.
When you include derivatives on everything, I mean, you have 300 trillion sitting in supply chains and value chains. You have 300 trillion sitting in bonds. Everybody thinks that the equity market is the big behemoth. That's 90 trillion. It's not even close to the supply chains of the world, right? So like, and then you start adding compounding on derivatives of these things, and you're absolutely getting up into those numbers. So when we look at I'm so glad you said this, Ken, because sometimes we operate in a vacuum here, and it isn't to say Web3 is bad or speaking bad. It's just saying, like, pick your head up for a second. You've got a $3 trillion sandbox of innovation happening over here. It's nothing. It is not a scratch on the
it's goldfish. It's a goldfish pool. You know, it's a tiny 100%. Little pool.
And so my question
outside the windows of the ocean, you know,
100%. My question has always been, the validity of this and this technology innovation will be when that money is moving over onto it. That's the question. Because until you do that, I don't believe that there's actual real world validity, because that's what's actually running the world. The supply chains of the world are actually
that's why you're a perfect Web3 founder.
Well, but if you can do that, you can think that way and go, how do I get them over? And here's my there's a lot of it.
You've got the right name for your project too, the conduit. You know,
conduit.
to be a conduit for that value transfer, you know. And
that's why we call ourselves 2.5. We're in this middle ground where we absolutely are adhering to 2.0s and bringing them into here, but we're not a full Web3. We have many Web3 tenets and elements, right? So we play to both. Both can run on top, that type of thing. But we really want to be a bridge to this world to where you can go capture the larger market values. And in order to do that, if you're going to facilitate, to Ken's point, you need both history and experience and brilliant innovation. It's the mix of both of those that has the correct outcome, because incredible innovation most of the time breaks things. And sometimes they end with a correct outcome, but most of the time they're actually just breaking things. And it's just true. That's why we see so many innovators. They're constantly innovating, and how many, 1 out of 1,000 are a hit. So that's their job. It's okay. This is not a push or diss on anyone. But when you combine a genius in innovation with real world history and experience, right? That's when you have something and then you also, everything's about timing. Is the market ready for this movement, right? Brilliant ideas get passed on every single day because the market wasn't ready. You were 5 years too early, right? And so, but if all those things align, when all those things kind of align, that's when transformation happens. And I do think that we have an opportunity with incredibly powerful, innovative constructs that I think now need to go, great, it was done in a sandbox. How does this get applied so that, real world applications, real world economies can start operating on here, and look at the value of what's going to occur over there. The fact of the matter is that if Web3 stays in a purely speculative state, there's only so much speculation in the entire world's economy, which means there's a cap. You know what there isn't a cap to? The amount of value creation, GDP, and resources that need to be sold.
Supply chain, electricity, power generation, power consumption.
That's it. So that's bringing this full circle, and why I think Ken and I are so excited is that DePIN, to me, of all the different subsector categories that have come out of Web3 and different things, DePIN is the one that feels like it has the greatest bridge to existing real world applications and real business models. And I'm like, man, if this thing can nail it, this will be the bridge to bring massive value into what we think of as Web3. It is the greatest opportunity. So.
Exactly, man. And so maybe as we're wrapping this up, it feels like you're putting a beautiful bow on it, Brandon. Thank you. I'd like to first off invite everyone who hears this to download the Daylight app if you're in the United States, to connect your home energy devices. We're giving away tons of money for referrals, gift cards to Amazon and Walmart, as Ken mentioned. We've been able to scale the network to thousands of MAUs already in 2.5 months since launching the app, and thousands of energy devices connected. And then to me, like where my genius, such that it exists, if whatever, my skill lies is in giving enough of a shit about the people who are in our community to really just feed them, to like to make them feel included. We're like, I love Web3 because it's a global movement. Some of my closest friends that I've made over my years as community manager at Forta and head of community at Daylight, or at WorldCoin, and then now at Daylight, have been people in East Africa, Uganda, Kenya, people in Chile, people in Argentina, people in Vietnam, people in Ukraine, folks who I would not have the chance to interact with, especially not economically, in a more traditional role or more traditional business. My background is actually in environmental science. I hold a master's in ecology from the Columbia University Earth Institute here in New York City. And I see, planetary scale problems with planetary scale solutions, or perhaps with local solutions, planetary scale problems with hyper local solutions. And Daylight is a fascinating route to begin to address the power generation system here in the US, because solar already is cheaper, it's already more efficient. There's so many downstream benefits of solar adoption, socially, environmentally, in terms of sovereignty and being, localizing production. So it's decentralization just from word go. Forget about Web3. It's DePIN. Having solar on your roof is DePIN. Whether you're using a ledger at any point in that process, it's decentralized physical infrastructure. You're not getting your power from, the coal plant in the 3 towns over. You're getting it from your rooftop. So, join the Daylight.
And I'd say even going a step further is like when you overproduce electricity, like unless you have a power wall, or if you overproduce your power wall, it's going back into the grid. So that's the DePIN part in my mind, is like, the virtual power plant concept is exactly, that's probably one of the more DePIN-esque, more quintessential DePIN projects out there. And I think sometimes we forget about that because we think of IoT sensors all the time. But you have to have 2 parts, right? You have to have some physical infrastructure that is decentralized. And if we can articulate those 2 things, if we can map those 2 things to your project, I'm happy calling you a DePIN.
I think we're hitting it, and obviously, as Brandon, you eloquently, strawmanned earlier, which you don't need to strawman. It's just the reality is that the great challenge for us and for any sensor-based project is the proofs. And that's not something that I, as the front of house, am party to. I don't have the answers of how we're going to secure it, but just know that this is not something that's going over our heads. Like, that's what our smart contracts, that's what our medallions, that's what the entire network is built to secure that data.
Well, if you guys are open to it, I know Samuel, I've mentioned this to you. We do have a council that we're putting together of DePIN projects. I can't unilaterally invite you into the project, and even Brandon, together we couldn't invite you. But we've got a group of people. There's 7 members of that right now. And what I'd like to do is maybe we can do a follow-up call if you want to bring Jason on, or somebody who can talk on a technical level to answer. Yeah, if we can get him on. We're still coming up with the name. I think Council of Decentralized Ecosystems Code might end up being what it is, or Council of Decentralized Economies.
That's even
there
better.
We go. Brandon's going for economies. But we did a quick vote. I did Council for Harmonized Autonomous Infrastructure Networks, which is Chain. And I was the only one that voted for it. Everybody else voted for Council of Decentralized Ecosystems. No Chain. Come on, dude. No,
haven't you heard Coinbase's new? Well, I guess we're saying on-chain now, so we're still saying chain, but not blockchain.
Yeah. Ledger. Yeah, Ledger's probably. But that being said, I think that's the next step, is like, let's get Jason on and have him answer some of those more technical questions. I'd love to evaluate that. And then what I'd like to do is take both videos and hand it to the council and say, hey guys, can we bring Daylight into this? And if everybody in the council votes yes on it, like I say, if you guys are up for it, we'd love to have you part of the council. We support each other. We're exploring how to build these joint economies. So it is really a more, we're focusing on industry best practices and standards and stuff like that. We haven't really kicked off actively yet. It's still in the very early formation. We're just figuring out the name of it. But we do want to make sure that I don't want to say exclusive, but we want to make sure that there is a bar to entry. I feel very positive about Daylight, but I don't want to make any assumptions, right? So I want to make sure we get certain questions answered and we build the strongest steelman case to take to the rest of the group. And I think that'd be a great step forward. And for everybody in the council, if we can add projects to demonstrate, like, what does a good DePIN project look like? That's valuable to all of us to have that recognition.
Seems like that's what this DePIN Masterminds is all about.
That's right. Yeah. And, Brandon and I generally are the two co-hosts on this. Brandon's been so gracious to impart his time to join me on this adventure. But it's not limited to just us. Like the DePIN Masterminds, even though Tashi kind of sponsors it because we pay for the StreamYard. But absolutely, we'd love to have more people in the space challenging other people. So in the future, bringing on other DePIN projects and saying, now you got to defend your project. You got to steelman your project for the rest of us. And we're going to ask you questions that, are questions we've had asked to us and lessons that we've learned and go from there. So anyway, I want to thank you so much for joining.
One of the greatest, chats I've had the chance to conduct on Daylight, because you guys just know your stuff so backwards and forwards, and I'm learning as I'm explaining, which is I'm want to do in my life. And yeah, been a fascinating time. I'm sure the team will be honored by the potential offer of inclusion in the Council of Decentralized Economies. Let's just keep this conversation going. And, I'm a huge fan of both of your projects, and thank you for your time.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Brandon, for joining again. Thanks, Samuel. This is all going to definitely happen again. But everybody, remember, every week, Tuesday at noon Pacific, we have the DePIN Masterminds. We always have different guests on. I shouldn't say we always have different guests on. We have different guests on. Brandon is pretty regular here, but we invite everybody to join us. If you've got a project you'd like us to explore, by all means, make the introduction, and you can make it directly to me on Twitter or Brandon, Conduit, Tashi. You can join our Discord, and we can have that discussion there. I am going to encourage you, go check out, there we go, daylight.world. Do your own research, explore the project. I'm excited about it. I'm optimistic about it. And let's continue this discussion, exploring projects like this. Let's discover other DePIN Web3 projects that we can look at and evaluate and strawman and steelman, and figure out what the real value is and how we build this whole economy as a whole. I actually really like that. Brandon brought that up earlier. Instead of saying ecosystem, let's start saying economy, because I think that's the right way to think about it at a very high level about value creation. So let's think about how we can really grow this economy, this DePIN economy. By all means, join us live, again, every Tuesday, noon Pacific. Ask questions. Please ask lots of questions. We will relay those questions as you see on stream and get them answered. Thanks again for joining, and I'll see you again next week.